Everyone, I'm excited to do a presentation today. This is kind of a practice run that I'm doing, and I'll probably share this with my inner circle and YouTube membership clubs for the Crusher crew. And so, in a few hours, I'm doing a presentation for my friend Vinny over at the Disclosure team, and I'm really honored to be a part of this, a part of UFO Disclosure and the different and difficult spectrums and layers of what it means to delve into this with all of the government conspiracies, the cover ups, some of the spooky stuff, the uncomfortable things regarding it, the technology that overlaps all of it. And I've decided to call it the entire UFO ultra spectrum. This is a little bit of a nod to John Keel, who wrote the book, the what is that called? Oh my gosh, the titles of his books. He wrote the Mothman prophecies, but he wrote it about the ultra terrestrials and the super spectrum. And so I've kind of combined those words and called it the ultra spectrum. So I'm excited to go through all of that. But how I really got started in a lot of this work was by being a filmmaker, an independent filmmaker, going out to different ancient locations up to petroglyph canyons and such, and started to document them because of my fascination with that. After watching episodes of Ancient Aliens and being a little bit skeptical about that as a debunker, I decided to go and look for myself. I realized that most of those locations were right around where I lived. There was canyons, petroglyphs, pictographs, the Grand Canyon, Area 51, Nellis Air Force Base, and all this ancient overlapping indigenous history, some of the most ancient locations in North America, that there are findings in Nevada that are very almost mythological. They're over 10,000 years old and very fascinating stuff. And so I kind of got hooked into going into that and going to all of these places. In fact, this is a spot just right behind my house that I can go to within just a few minutes. And my whole area is surrounded by all of this. And when I started going out to these spots, I expected to find just symbols of just regular bighorn sheep and day to day life. But what I found instead was something much deeper. There were these ancient symbols all over the place that seemed to be like a mapping system or to point to the sky or the stars. And the figures weren't necessarily entirely human looking. They were either shaman or they were looked like constellations to the stars or star people. And when I started delving into the ancient mysteries and the symbolism around all of that, not only did I find all these global connections to the ancient Indus Valley in Asia, but even ancient Egypt, the Phoenician cultures, ancient Africa, and the same symbols that you see all over the world, we find in the petroglyphs across the valleys of Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And as I started going to these locations, I started also having experiences at these locations. When I would go and sit here and meditate in these spots, I would have profound sort of out of body experiences and visions, and go home and have dreams and paranormal, like what you would call hitchhiker effect phenomena, poltergeist type of things that would occur in my house and such. And a lot of times I would see orbs of light or figures of light or even shadow figures that would pop up that made me wonder what all of this was really about, if there was a connection to human consciousness and what all of that meant. This spot specifically is a very special place to me that has all of these cosmic alignments to the stars, to the summer solstice, and the sun coming up sends a beam of light down through this crack in the rocks behind me onto this boulder and tells an entire story about this figure appearing and teaching the villagers and taking them through these cosmic initiations. And there's all this symbolism to the bird feet here with the three toes and three fingers. I think it's interesting how they have this sort of chest plate, which is similar to the stuff that they're finding in Peru. I don't know how valid it is, but the way that the humanoid figures are all shaped like this with the shoulders out and all of this sort of cosmic constellation symbolism with Orion and the staff of Orion, and going through these interdimensional portals and doorways on these spiritual journeys. And going to these places, I inadvertently started having similar experiences myself, where I would have these dreams and visions and these sort of like shamanistic sort of visions and things that would occur. So very fascinating stuff that sort of sent me down a rabbit hole that eventually led me on this path that took me up and around the areas of Skinwalker Ranch. As I was delving into all of this stuff, I started remembering experiences from my childhood, from sleep paralysis episodes, and having different things occur to me growing up as a kid. And ultimately, a lot of the that resonated around the location of Skinwalker Ranch up in Vernal, Utah. These are petroglyphs that are up in a valley, a secret valley that I had to get permission and taken to with Caleb, the security officer at Skinwalker Ranch. And one of his friends from the Shoshone tribe took us up to this area. And these are all handprints on the wall, placed among all these deity figures in the background of this wall. Very interesting place. There's evidence that there could have been sacrificial offerings done on the waterfall up above and all kinds of stuff. And they would get this white pigment from under the rocks. Very fascinating. The ancient indigenous connection is something that I want you to remember throughout this entire presentation, because it's critical. Even when we start getting into some of the creepy, spooky aspects of this and the technology and the conspiracies around it, I want you to always hang on to and remember the underlying truth about this phenomena has always existed and been around for a long time, or it has something to do with nonlinear time. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. But ultimately, my work with the ancient petroglyphs and around the ancient alien type stuff, the Native American aspect of it, opened a lot of doors. And I ended up working with Chris Bartell, Caleb Bench, Thomas Winterton, making friends with all these guys, and even texting back and forth and calling and talking with Brandon Fugel. This is me and Thomas Winterton in front of a big petroglyph boulder up at Skinwalker Ranch. Right above my head there is kind of a swirl of like very old faded petroglyphs that are on that boulder. Very difficult to see, but I did get to go up there and meet those guys. This is Caleb recounting his experience of seeing like a portal sort of window open up on the ranch and move across when he was there with Travis Taylor, almost like a holographic sort of like a cloaking window or polygonal light shape that moved across the area. And he's describing that to me here. But yeah, I was able to go into Skinwalker Ranch headquarters over there behind me where that telescope is in those little Tupperwares right here. Is actual soil samples, and then there's whole trays there where they have metamaterial that is saved. But interesting stuff. So this is kind of the command center there at Skinwalker Ranch when I got to go. We also went up there. This is my friend Chris, and then this is the whole half of the Skinwalker Ranch team. Caleb, we've got Eric Bard, Thomas Winterton and his son, and me. And James Keenan, he's on the Mystery of Blind Frog Ranch TV show now. And this is us going up and exploring underground tunnel systems up and above and around that are connected to the aquifer that flows underneath Skinwalker Ranch. So we've done a lot of work together sort of beyond and behind the scenes. And ultimately that led to me working on a TV show with the History Channel called Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, where we've gone to other locations and other places that might be connected to Skinwalker Ranch as well. One of the places that I end up going a lot is around Area 51, because Skinwalker Ranch and some of the people involved are interconnected to Area 51, as well as the ancient petroglyphs that are some of the oldest in North America are right in and around the entrances of Area 51, which is very interesting to me. And so some of my work there, I've gone and I've filmed some interesting things. And so the connection between ufology, UFO crash recovery programs, Area 51, Bob Lazar, Colonel Alexander, the whole slew of everybody involved in all of this, Tom DeLonge now, it all became a point of interest to me in what I was doing in this area. Next to Area 51 is a place called Mount Wilson Ranch. And this is a over 100-acre ranch in Nevada that's 80 miles north of Area 51. And this is a place that was owned by Bob Bigelow, that was funded by an entire scientific research team of interesting people and physicists. And they were all up there as a part of Bob Bigelow's team at the same time as Skinwalker Ranch was going on up in Utah. And there was a lot of digging going on underground. Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program was a part of the funding and interest of this place. Bigelow has come out and admitted that he was here, and we've got a lot of evidence that of this up at Mount Wilson Ranch, that something was going on. So from the Nevada test site to Mount Wilson is not very far. And we're going to go through a lot of these pictures and catch up a little bit, but these are actual whistleblower photographs that have been leaked to us. Bob Bigelow, Jacques Vallée, Hal Puthoff, and Tim Ryan over there. And if I back up just a little bit, there's even this picture here that shows Tim Ryan, Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée. I think her name is Shelley Wadsworth. There's Colm Kelleher. This is Bob Bigelow, Eric Davis. I'm not sure who this gentleman is back here or who this gentleman is here. These are question marks, but this is Mount Wilson Ranch, and they were all up here doing the research and investigating the same time as Skinwalker Ranch. So if you're not sure who Hal Puthoff is, he worked hand in hand with Kit Green, who is a physicist and neurologist that works at the CIA. And this is Russell Targ and Pat Price. He was a professional psychic spy and remote viewer for the original remote viewing group at NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science. And they were also, this is at Stanford Research Institute, I believe. Kit Green is all over television doing neuroscience. Russell Targ is a remote viewer and originally a laser physicist. Hal Puthoff is also a laser physicist. We're going to get into these guys a lot more. But these guys were all involved in this, and they were all involved in Skinwalker Ranch, and they are at the core of the UFO mystery. And this has been going on since 1973. So this is what I'm interested in. Who are the UFO crash recovery people really, and what were they really up to? And so there's a whole bunch of leaked photographs, and a lot of this is even public information, but I just want to start to get you familiar with the names and the faces. If you're already familiar, this is going to be really surprising to you. If you're not, you might have to rewatch this a few times to catch up with all of it. But here's Hal Puthoff again with Phil Corso. He wrote the book The Day After Roswell, about the Roswell crash. Here's George Knapp, the newspaper journalist from Nevada and the Nevada Sun, and he wrote the original release articles and stuff about Skinwalker Ranch, and he's been at the core of all that with Jeremy Corbell as well. And there's Colonel Alexander. So Colonel Alexander, he has been getting awards for directed energy weapons research and all kinds of stuff, but he was also there the day that Skinwalker Ranch was purchased. And these guys were all at the core of the UFO mystery. And even, this guy was sitting here at the UFO congressional hearings when they were doing the whistleblower stuff with David Grush, George Knapp. So they're all up to here in ufology and have always been. So let's keep going. We have a lot of ground to cover here. So up at Mount Wilson Ranch, there is evidence of underground facilities and bases, tunnel systems, and abandoned mining operations. One of the things that we discovered is this sort of phased array looking thing that was underneath the lower meadow out in front of this 1800s pioneer cabin. So up here at Mount Wilson Ranch is a really fascinating place because of that direct connection with Skinwalker Ranch and the ownership with Bob Bigelow. And it goes back older than that. from Ronald Reagan's era into Howard Hughes. We know that Howard Hughes purchased through a proxy individual through the Mormon Church and other individuals, bought Mount Wilson Ranch as part of a mining and exploration and research place and property. And there's also ancient indigenous artifacts all over the place. These were dated by an archaeologist. This is the same archaeologist that works up and around Skinwalker Ranch at the Uinta Basin Archaeological Association. And these spearheads are authentic ceremonial and ritual spearheads that made of obsidian, and they were found in the creek bed there at Craw Creek, and they've been dated around 4,000 years old. So this overlapping history involved in this is a critical part of it. And remember, the ancient petroglyphs and pictographs and these artifacts are always a key. And even though the focus of ufology is all about flying spaceships, I want to kind of bring it down to what the actual research was all about. Okay, so we're going to move on here and get to the actual evidence of what was going on with Mount Wilson Ranch and some of this research and the people that were there, because it's critical to know what was going on with ufology by looking at the participants in the research, the funding, the patents involved, who they were, where they were, what they were really doing, who they were surrounded with, and so on. So we have Mount Wilson Ranch in August 1996, and there's Bob Bigelow, Jacques Vallée, who the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind was based off of, and also we have Hal Puthoff over here. Hal Puthoff is currently at To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge. And there's Dr. Tim Ryan. He's kind of a quiet, shadowy figure. I do believe that he currently still lives and works in, or maybe he's retired now, but is in California somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where he's at. Here's another photograph where we have Tim Ryan, Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée, Shelley Wadsworth, Colm Kelleher, Bob Bigelow, Eric Davis, and then I'm not sure who these other people are. I'm not sure who the cameraman is or camera person is who took the photo, but this is at Mount Wilson Ranch in August 1996, literally 2 weeks before Bigelow bought Skinwalker Ranch. And he owned both places for over 10 years. And it was a whole thing. He's come out and admitted as such. So the question is, what were they really doing at this time? What were these guys up to? What was Tim doing? Where did he get his money? What was he doing? What was Jacques Vallée really doing? What were these guys all up to? And we're just going to touch on these with the time that we have to get through all of this. And we're going to cover a lot of ground and watch some video clips that I put together. So first of all, we have to get through the 5 observables of Lou Elizondo, because with Lou Elizondo, he came out and they started producing all these TV shows and documentaries, and with his partnerships and friendships with all these people in ufology, he kind of came out saying that he was like promoted himself as the first whistleblower, and he sort of set up this framework and scaffolding within ufology and on UFO Twitter about the 5 observables. And this was published all over the place. The 5 observables, this is like the definition of what we should be looking for. This is what we should base our ufology off of. And I want to challenge that with my presentation today by showing what these guys were really doing and how much it had very little, if nothing at all, to do with these 5 observables. So the 5 observables of Lou Elizondo are the anti-gravity and gravity lift. All of the evidences that you see and presented in the Tic Tac event. The sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, low observability and cloaking, or transmedium travel. So going in and out of different physical media, from the air to outer space, into the water, into solid ground potentially. And these are all the stories that you hear around the ufology. So as we look at these 5 observables, first of all, I want to prove and show how all of these 5 aspects have been achieved already early on during Operation Paperclip clear back in World War II. So let's get into exactly how that happened.
Crossed beam over the horizon radars.
Let's see. We should have sound here.
Crossed beam over the horizon radars, such as the giant Soviet woodpecker transmitters, are ideal for use as carriers or wires for distant time-reversed wave interferometry. A return time-reversed signal of extreme power can be delivered directly to that target. Almost all of the transmitted time-reversed wave energy will arrive at and in that distant target, even through a highly nonlinear medium or under scattering conditions. Hardly any of the energy will be lost en route. If the target is fast-moving, a lead correction signal can be calculated and added to steer the return path. Second, real-time holography can readily be accomplished using time-reversed waves and without first making holograms. In addition, by using pumped four-wave mixing, as much energy as one desires can be placed into the distant hologram, including even negative energy, which cancels an equal amount of positive energy. Powerful geometrical forms, balls, shapes, hemispherical shells, and so forth, of electromagnetic energy can be created at a distance.
So I'm just going to pause here really quick and just point this out, that we have just in this short little clip that I've shared, that you should all go watch the full video when you get a chance, that you have the revelation that this secret Tesla technology, this reverse time wave cross beam Tesla technology, basically takes a frequency or a radar signal, or even almost like a laser beam. It goes through the earth. They triangulate that signal into a crossbeam where it focalizes or focuses onto a single point. And within that, it creates these powerful holograms that he said go through transmedium, and it fits all of the 5 observables of Lou Elizondo. These holograms, they can basically point and direct around just like you would use a touchpad with your finger, and you could move these powerful plasma forms and plasma shapes that you could form and create into different shapes and sizes. And you could disappear them, reappear them, sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures. You would pick them up definitely on the radars. Everything's backwards for me. So you would get everything that you would get from the experiences of the Tic Tac, even how they saw the water churning on the ocean. And then you have the whole Tic Tac incident with Commander Fravor, and how this thing was disappearing and reappearing, and it knew their location where they're supposed to go next. And this was going in, and they watched them go in and out of the water. They see these things go in and out of mountains, and all of these sightings coincide at the exact same time as the development of radar technology at the end of World War II and Operation Paperclip. So let's just keep going and keep all of this in mind. With the technology and the weaponization of all of this, we're going to dig into the layers underneath and get back into the ancient history, the indigenous people, and what it really means to us as a people, and what happened here, and why this is a difficult part of disclosure. But we need to know what this capability is before we get too far.
At a distance, quite readily by interferometry or crossed beam techniques using time-reversed waves. Since the TR wave carriers do not disperse with distance, these interference energy forms can be assembled by crossing TR wave beams at great distances, even at thousands of miles. Now, beginning in July 1976, powerful new Soviet over-the-horizon radars,
So notice this is 1988, and he's talking about powerful Soviet radars clear back in this day in the 80s. And we're going to dig into how this involves even how it's used and goes into the 1960s, this technology.
infamous woodpeckers became operational. Extensive weather engineering over the U.S. has been accomplished by these weapon systems. Now, this has been separately documented by the present author, by C.B. Baker, editor of Youth Action News, Andrew Mikrowski of Canada's Planetary Association for Clean Energy, and other researchers such as Andrea Puharich.
So he mentions right at the end there, researchers Andrea Puharich, and that was mentioned promoting him by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bearden in 1988, and he is referencing this gentleman. So let's get into what Andrei Puharich is. We have to really understand who Andrei Puharich is to get a sense of ufology and the other left-handed or underhanded side of what all of this was about.
And I have no interest in the Nazis, frankly, except as a historical aberration of the human spirit, where, you know, some group thinks they really are superior and have to prove it by clobbering everybody who is not superior and slaughtering some 40 million people in the process. So I would say that the only reason that I take any interest in this is like studying pathology, you know, getting into the diseases of mankind, and it's kind of sickening process. But the only reason I pursue it is that I'm sorry to say that the neo-Nazis are very much alive and well, and I've run into them. As a matter of fact, their headquarters are in England, and they're financed, believe it or not, by a huge trust left by the Shah of Iran's family. And in England it has one name, and it's not in Iran anymore because that was taken over by the revolutionary Iranians. But they are very much alive and well, and their current program, the reason I know this is to know where I get my facts from, is for some reason or other, even though I'm of Slavic origin, the Germans think I'm hot stuff in this area of the occult and all this stuff, and they've wooed me for years, but in very subtle ways, and they wanted me to be the research director of their foundation.
So this is Uri Geller from Israel, who ended up at Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff, and that is Andrei Puharich right here. So we're going to go ahead and skip ahead for time. So Andrei Puharich started clear back up in Maine, and he was swept up, had a facility in New York, and then in California. He was down in Costa Rica and South America doing all kinds of psychedelic and psychic research. He was one of the originators of this idea of the Gateway program. He wrote books about Uri Geller, Bob Monroe of the Monroe Institute. Andrei Puharich even said that Bob Monroe had his first out-of-body visions by huffing glue, modeling glue. But Andrei Puharich was big into doing psychedelic mushrooms, isolation chambers. They were putting people into Faraday cages, pumping frequencies, lights, and sounds into them, and seeing what happened to the brain, perceptions, and consciousness. And they were also trying to do psychokinetic telepathy and remote viewing. So it's very fascinating stuff. So he was the first guy to basically bring Uri Geller over into the United States to become a part of CIA and Stanford Research Institute with Hal Puthoff. And all of these guys in this research ends up eventually in some really interesting places. So there he is. He wrote the books about Uri Geller, introduced him into the CIA programs of the psychic spy work. And there he is at Stanford with Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff and these guys, remember, this is all supposed to do with UFOs. But here they are doing psychedelics and psychic research in remote viewing instead, everyone involved. They're not really looking at outer space or studying astrophysics. These guys are looking at consciousness, right? So there's Hal Puthoff with Uri Geller, and they're doing psychic spy techniques to see if Uri can tell what's inside the jars, or if he can move things with his mind and all kinds of stuff. And that is Dr. Hal Puthoff, a laser physicist and scientist that became a psychic spy consciousness worker for Project Grill Flame and Stargate and all that. And this is Dr. Hal Puthoff with Lou Elizondo, who wrote the 5 observables. And this is Dr. Eric Davis. And these guys are all together standing in front of a painting that was done by Ingo Swann, one of the most prominent remote viewers. And Hal Puthoff is the founder of the remote viewing program at Stanford. And so these guys are all friends. They're all interconnected. And Eric Davis is the one responsible for a lot of the stories from Skinwalker Ranch. So we have these 5 observables by Lou Elizondo, but so far, everybody involved in the ufology and UFO research that ended up at Congress with the metamaterials, they're mostly involved in psychic spy research. They're not really looking at the stars. They're not really looking at outer space all that much. These 5 observables don't seem to matter. They're looking more into human consciousness, right? So, okay. And let's take a look at this picture. Here you have Hal Puthoff, Lou Elizondo, and Eric Davis. And we're going to take one more jump really quick to this photo. And this is right at Skinwalker Ranch, the same photograph up there. And up here, you've got Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, Eric Bard, someone else over here, I'm not sure who that is. And then you've got Brandon Fugel. Okay, and this is them at Skinwalker Ranch, all connected. The same people here that are involved in ufology, but there they are at Skinwalker Ranch. This is Eric Davis here and Hal Puthoff. And this is the same Eric Davis from the Wilson Davis memo and document that is all over everything that has to do with them trying to look for UFO crash retrievals and that involves all of that. It talks about the high magnetic field laboratory and roundtable discussions. And so it's just, we're talking about the same people here that are involved in ufology, standing at an ancient Native American site, a ritual site in Utah, Skinwalker Ranch, that's named after a Navajo curse, right? So why? And also, here's the same scientists here, Dr. Hal Puthoff again. And there's Eric Davis over on the side over here. And they're up at Mount Wilson Ranch again, that same spot where we had the ancient Native American spears and artifacts. And it's near Area 51. So we have this weaponization and technological overlay and intrigue, and these scientists all doing like wizard work, psychic spy, remote viewing studies and consciousness. And so let's get to the bottom of who these people really were and what they were doing. This is a place that I've been many times, Mount Wilson Ranch. I'm kind of in the way here, but this is a book that was written by Jacques Vallée that shows a picture of Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée, and Tim Ryan, and they're parked right up there at Mount Wilson Ranch. And this is at the exact same time, 1996, and they're even wearing the same clothes, parked right there. So this is a place that I've been. So let's see what Dr. Tim Ryan was doing. He works for SARA right here. So let's look at what their patents and funding was all about real quick. You've got non-lethal weapons defense systems, aerosol canned, rapidly deployable powered electrical generator, innovative acoustic sensor for target acquisition, heated mounted wrists for tactical information displays, advanced detection techniques, ordnance research. Let's skip ahead a little bit here for time. He's got tons of patents here. Oh, page 2. Momentum arrest, shock collapse, countermeasures. These are all directed energy weapon systems. There's even ground penetrating radar systems, anti-gravity stuff, pulse power modulation systems, acoustic sensors, avoidance systems beyond visual sight. I could go on and on and on. He's got pages and pages and millions of dollars of funding into non-lethal weapons technology, like Tesla technology. So this is me and all my other friends that are working up there at Mount Wilson Ranch at the exact same parking lot in the same location that we've worked there together. So as we go back to this picture and we look at these individuals, here we also have Jacques Vallée. And when we go into this picture here, this was down in Costa Rica. This is a really fascinating one because there we have Andrea Puharich, who we already learned up in Maine was putting people in the Faraday cages, doing psychedelic spy stuff, and working with Uri Geller on remote viewing. And there's Jacques Vallée, the ufologist, John Keel, the one who wrote the seventh tower in the ultra spectrum, ultra terrestrials and the super spectrum, and the Mothman prophecies. And then this is Dr. Jacobo Grinberg. And I didn't know who this guy was over at the end of the bar with the beard for the longest time. But let's figure out who these guys were because what they were really doing. Because to the public, everybody assumes that they were looking for UFOs and flying saucers from outer space. But was that really what they believed? Was that really what they did? Or is that just what the media shows us? So let's get into this. First of all, we have to point out that Jacobo Grinberg has been missing since December 1994. He has literally vanished and been missing. This is all of them together. This is Andrea Puharich, Jacques Vallée, John Keel, Jacobo Grinberg, and this is all them in Costa Rica in 1985. And this is Jacobo Grinberg doing shamanistic research, telepathic research with kids. Notice he's got blindfolds on the kids up there, and it's almost like Stranger Things. Can you telepathically communicate or do remote viewing similar to the Uri Geller type stuff, right? So let's go back a little bit further into history and figure out why all these guys were doing this. Why during this time period? What did they uncover? Why did Bigelow get it? And why are they doing all of this? And it comes down to Nikola Tesla. All perceptible matter comes from a primary substance or a tenuity beyond conception filling all space, the akasha or the luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force calling into existence in never-ending cycles, all things and phenomena. So that was Nikola Tesla basically saying that everything comes up from this substrate that is like an ether, that it comes from a creative force or prana that really is perception and consciousness. It's really fascinating. So in Operation Paperclip, what happened was there was thousands of researchers that were brought over from Germany. They were Nazis and Zionists that were smuggled over, and instead of being tried, convicted, and incarcerated for their crimes, they were recruited by Truman to basically work for us. And they became Werner von Braun and the rocket programs and the space program. And they also became the psychic spy program. And Operation Paperclip was way bigger than people think, and it created sort of an underground infiltration or a coup within our own country where these deep state government funded programs started popping up. And this work from Operation Paperclip included a lot of the patents and the research of of Nikola Tesla. And Nikola Tesla's paperwork and his patents and a lot of his research wound up in the hands of Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes took this technology and this patents, and they realized that they had a separate Cold War race alongside parallel to the nuclear war race with Russia. There was also this radar technology race, this Tesla technology, ultra low frequency ground penetrating radar technology. How do you guide torpedoes through the water? How do you tell where submarines are going? How do you communicate with the submarines through the water? And how do you communicate with astronauts in outer space? How do you detect incoming nuclear threats and so on? So they had to develop this phased array radar system, and that went into the hands of Howard Hughes Aircraft Company.
Start talking about the Howard Hughes Company and how they had the first psychotronic directed energy system contracts, and all of the evidence says and rumors are that he was up here and he's the one that put in the runway.
Since he never left the Desert Inn, he needed a team of executive assistants and advisors to oversee his business dealings. This team was led by a man named Frank Gay, who was curiously known as Bill. Gay was a Mormon that Hughes had hired right out of UCLA. Hughes preferred working with Mormons because he knew they didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. He thought this made them more likely to avoid being tempted by the vices of Vegas and handle his business with greater discretion and integrity. Hughes was so committed to using Mormons that they wound up composing the entirety of Gay's team.
According to the weather, we got maybe 2 hours before full blizzard, so we got to move fast. Okay.
So one of the things that we did was try to explore the entire underground of this location up here at Mount Wilson Ranch, and that was led to a collaboration with the History Channel, where we were trying to get into the secret labs where that type of skinwalker, not skinwalker, the Stranger Things experimentation may have gone on. That's more focused on using phased array directed energy systems to target individuals to control their perceptions along with psychedelics and such. And so a lot of the evidence strangely is revolving around that when you dig into what Howard Hughes was doing. And when we go into Howard Hughes's research, that all became intertwined and intertangled directly with the work of Bob Bigelow eventually in the same location. So where Howard Hughes was and a lot of the properties that he bought wound up in the same interest of what Bigelow was doing. And when we get back to this photograph here, it stays really fascinating. And we look down, we have Andrea Puharich, Jacques Vallée, John Keel, and Jacobo Grinsberg. And Jacobo was literally doing shamanism on children, psychic spy, telepathy, energy healing, psychic surgeries, trying to communicate and conjure entities, and all kinds of fascinating stuff. And this, I believe, led to this weaponization of shamanism. And so let's get into how that may have occurred.
Jacobo was, amongst everything, a scientist, but he went into all those directions working with shamans, and also he was a theoretician at the same time. He was doing experiments in the lab. So it's like he has many legs. We could talk about the theory, which I think is the most important aspect if you would ask him, his synergic theory. But also in the lab, he was doing pioneer experiments in the 70s, maybe the 80s, until 94 when he disappeared. And so one thing they were doing in the lab, they were studying hemispheric coherence. And his lab had the title Human Communication. So they were trying to see what happens in certain meditative states, and what happens in the brain, and whether there's coherence amongst the hemispheres. But then they were also testing two people and how both brains would align with each other, would influence each other. And then he went further, and that was actually the last experiment he did before he disappeared. And he was inspired by the EPR, Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen experiment, or this thought experiment. So his final experiment was taking these people that were in interaction, close interaction in the same room, let's say, like the electrons in physics, put them aside in Faraday cages, and then stimulate with some very simple visual stimulus in one case, one of the subjects, and then try to detect if this evoked potential in one subject was transferred to the second subject. And he called this the transferred potential. And it wasn't telepathy per se, but it was like neurobiological basis of non-local communication.
So Jacobo, I was saying Jacobo, but it's Jacobo is how he was pronouncing his name. I've heard it also Jacobo, but he was more fascinated with the consciousness aspects, the conscious communication and coupling, quantum entanglement of the human mind with other things, that remote viewing, remote perturbation or influencing. Can you affect things from a distance, action at a distance? And not only that, can you pick up or couple perceptions remotely between two different people. So once again, where are the flying saucers? Where are the aliens other than coming through a form of occult mysticism or esoteric shamanism, doing sort of almost like ayahuasca and pilgrimages into Costa Rica and all that. But then all of this sort of seeking spiritual wisdom and such. See, when he would go out and practice his faith and religion, he would go out into the ancient Aztec and Mayan pyramids and go up there to do his Jewish faith and everything. He never went into synagogues and such. So Jacobo was a really interesting guy, but he thought that using kids, similar to Andrei Puharich, would be the way to do this, doing experiments, psychic spy experiments using children that are able to basically pick up communication or signals from a distance. If you take a child whose consciousness hasn't fully formed yet, how do we create a certain type of formula? Just like Andrea Puharich was doing, he had a whole star camps for kids. They would have kids that thought that they were going to like astronaut camp that would end up in these psychic spy programs. And some of them didn't go too well. But these types of psychic spy program and research developed into Andrei Puharich working with Uri Geller moving to Stanford, and all this developing into the actual remote viewing program, the Gateway Method program of the Monroe Institute, and the whole backbone of what, for some reason, is the UFO recovery program too. How is that possible? So if you watch this video, this is the experiments with Uri Geller.
Research Institute has been conducting
We're going to skip through some of this,
but in the field of psychoenergetic effects.
And I'm going to turn the volume off here because I don't want any kind of copyright infringement. This is back in 1972. And what we have in this entire video presentation is Uri Geller, and he's doing research there. There is Uri Geller on the couch with Hal Puthoff, and that is astronaut Edgar Mitchell. The astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and he's there at Stanford as a part of this. Edgar Mitchell is part of the core of what was involved in getting the metamaterials from Roswell out to Las Vegas to Art Bell. So there's Hal Puthoff as well. And these guys are all at Stanford, and there's Russell Targ, laser physicists, okay? There's Hal Puthoff with Uri Geller, Hal Puthoff with psychic spy Ingo Swann and Russell Targ all together. And then there's Hal Puthoff with Eric Davis, Eric Bard, Brandon Fugel. There's Hal Puthoff with Lou Elizondo and Eric Davis in front of Ingo Swann's painting over there, the black and white one, all standing at Skinwalker Ranch. So where I still don't see where the flying saucers from outer space come into play. All of these individuals are involved in psychic spy research. So let's dig deeper down the rabbit hole. Where is Lou Elizondo's 5 observables? How does that even fit with what we've seen so far? Everything that we see so far has to do with human consciousness, telepathy, and evolution and perceptions. Why? So when we get back to this picture here, we see kind of the team, and it reveals the players, the specialization of what they were doing. Here they all are on the elevator together. You've got Colm Kelleher, Eric Davis. There's Kit Green. He's the one that is doing MRIs on everyone and is involved in the interference syndrome and Havana syndrome research. And they're all in the hallway together somewhere at a conference or something, a meeting, taking a picture. And there's Brandon Fugel and the team from Skinwalker Ranch, Thomas Winterton and Eric Bard. Thomas Winterton is also got an MRI and is the one with the swelling and the radiation interference syndrome and all of that going on. The same Eric Davis, that is part of the Wilson Davis memo, remember? So these guys all work together. I have to get out of the way here. There's Hal Puthoff with Russell Targ, Kit Green, Pat Price, clear back in the day, the founders of the Psychic Spy Program with Lou Elizondo and Colonel Alexander. And there's Colonel Alexander in the article, and they're talking about the use of ESP, telepathic behavior modification, mind control, parapsychology, right? There you've got Hal Puthoff, you've got Jack Sarfati and Kit Green, the neuroscientists all together. That almost looks like the same wood paneling in the background as this one. I'm not sure where that's at. There's Dr. Christopher Kit Green, and they're involved in the neuroscientists and the physical health effects of contacts with UFOs. Are these really UFOs, or is this radiation contact effects with the Tesla technology? So let's keep going. Here's the players that play. You've got Robert Bigelow, Tom DeLonge, Lou Elizondo, David Grush, Colm Kelleher. These are all the main players that are involved in what? UFOs, right? Flying saucers from outer space. How many of them do we know have been to Skinwalker Ranch or involved in the MRIs, the Havana syndrome and interference syndrome studies, the brain damage effects of radiation? So we have Robert Bigelow, Colm Kelleher. Colm Kelleher is a doctor involved in mad cow disease, biologics. George Knapp, we have many photos of him involved at Skinwalker Ranch. Gary Nolan, he's gone on to Fox News to talk about the MRIs and interference syndrome. There's Hal Puthoff. We've already shown pictures of him. Harry Reid, Jay Stratton is there on the TV show with Travis Taylor now, and Jacques Vallejo. We've got pictures of him at Skinwalker Ranch and at Mount Wilson. So all of these individuals are big fans. I may have even missed some of them because as I was putting this together. But again, we have all this talk of Lou Elizondo's 5 observables, and we're looking for spaceships from outer space. But all of these individuals are actually looking for portals at Native American ancient indigenous locations. So let's get into why. Here's a photo of Bigelow with Tom DeLonge and Lou Elizondo all together. So again, if the 5 observables have to do with outer space and are involved in that, why don't we see the evidence of that and the actual people and the research that was being done? Because what we really see is them involved in doing remote viewing and psychic spy stuff. Here they are. There's To the Stars Academy, and you've got Tom DeLonge in the board of directors, and right below him is Dr. Hal Puthoff over there on the left. The first day that they bought Skinwalker Ranch, look who was there. It was none other than John Alexander. So if we go back to Stanford Research Institute and we look at Skinwalker Ranch, the evidence doesn't seem to match research having to do with the 5 observables: anti-gravity, cloaking, transmedium travel. I don't see really the research being focused on flying saucers or UFOs. Why is everyone actually at Skinwalker Ranch? Right? Let's start to think about the people involved, even what they believe in their belief systems personally, and their backgrounds. Why UFOs and Skinwalkers all together? As we look through the history and who these individuals are, they're all laser physicists and scientists involved in remote viewing, psychic spy research. Let's look at John Alexander, who was there on the first day that Skinwalker Ranch was purchased. He was there with Bigelow, maybe even at Mount Wilson. And there he is with Dr. Edward Teller getting awards and speaking about non-lethal weapons, directed energy weapon systems for warfare. And then also here they all are. Again, Hal Puthoff, Phil Corso, George Knapp, and Colonel Alexander all together. But then in the same slides, here they are with indigenous peoples in Peru. Why are they interested in the shaman? What is that all about? So as we look into the people, it gets really kind of spooky, because here's Colonel Alexander with Michael Aquino, and he is actually a known. These two are Satan worshipers. I'm just telling you the truth. And they're actually brother-in-laws. So she is her sister, I believe. They're sisters. So that makes Colonel Alexander brother-in-law with Michael Aquino. And look at all these awards. And he's a known Satan worshiper. Here's also Jacques Vallée at the Satanic Temple. Right? So this is the same Colonel Alexander. Hal Puthoff is a Scientologist. So he was part of the Church of Scientology. Okay, and Scientology has a known history of trying to infiltrate the CIA and to promote their beliefs within other government organizations and within other religions. They've actually been busted doing that. So that's interesting. So Hal Puthoff is involved in quantum physics, parapsychology, paraphysical phenomena. And there's his whole background. And he's all involved in microwave and laser phenomena, but somehow involved in remote viewing. So this is Andre Puharich. Let's get to the core of what all of this is really about here.
Military operations, and the way to do it is to, you all know about the planetary grid. It's a structure, kind of a geodesic structure of the planet, in which there are certain power centers, and they all form a very elaborate link. You can read about it in the magazine called Pursuit. They've run about 3 stories on it in the last 2 years. Anyway, this planetary grid, if you are on a power center, and there are several hundred of these power centers, you can then use occult influence, which means you use somebody who's a very powerful sender of thoughts and energy, and from that point you radiate out your thoughts, and influence people without their knowing they're being influenced. So this is the current program of the neo-Nazis to take over the world. And what they do is, if the power center they locate, according to their own grid, is on land, they will try to find exactly where it is, actually go out and do the survey, and then they buy that land, and they put one of their people on there who's a very highly trained psychic. And they're buying up property all over the planet this way, and I knew the guy in England who was in charge of that particular operation. And this is what drove all the scientists nuts. In 1976, when the Russians first came on the air with the ELF signals being sent out from Russia, what drove them crazy was, here's a wave that can go through the entire Earth without being attenuated. In other words, it doesn't lose any energy to any surrounding system. And yet when it hits a human head or a body, it does interact and the signal is absorbed. This soliton is picked up. And it's taken 7 years of research, particularly by the Navy, to find out that this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually...
So really quick, this is the same Dr. Andre Puharich who was doing psychic spy experiments with the kids, similar to Jacobo Grinberg, and using the Tesla technology. And there he is in this video here. I skipped too far ahead there, but it shows in his patents that one of the things that he was developing here was a form of remote telepathy using radio frequencies. This is a device where they could insert a chip into the tooth of a person, into like someone's tooth filling, and then they could project voices into their heads. So they could have potentially filled one of Uri Geller's cavities during a health checkup and implanted one of these receivers into him and made him think that he was hearing voices or answers or knew telepathically where things were, or maybe even hijack some of the biofrequencies of him to do spoon bending and such. And also the ability to control perceptions of the brain where you think you're seeing things or hearing things from another dimension is all there within this technology. So it's a little bit spooky when you consider the implications. And here's him talking about it.
And in 1972, straight, and they make a deal that.
Sorry about that.
Military
This is my first time really going for this in Zoom. So it's good practice.
It actually reinforces the.
Here we go.
That this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually reinforces the integrity of DNA.
And they make a deal that the Mossad lets me go, releases me. And in 1972, straight to Palo Alto, California, to Stanford Research Institute. And that's where Dr. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and Edgar Mitchell and all those scientists who had very direct links to the CIA, they set up the experiments with me. So that was the beginning.
So that brings me now to my friend Chris Bartle, or Chris, I always call him Chris Bartel, but his name is actually Bartle. And he was a security officer at Skinwalker Ranch. And when I talked to him and I looked through his experience working there for almost 8 years, 6 to 8 years off and on, that what they actually had him doing, instead of looking for UFOs in the sky or flying saucers, he now is a photographer, and he does this fascinating kind of artwork like this. First of all, he was sent to Reno, Nevada, and had an MRI done on his brain to check for interference syndrome, radiation damage, by Kit Green. And this is part of his MRI from that experience. And he was a security guard at Skinwalker Ranch working for Bigelow. And his photography is all about this holographic interdimensional vision and consciousness and understanding reality. The type of research and security work that they had him doing was actually going down checklists like this, trying to talk to voices through EVP recordings and doing paranormal investigating, looking for ghosts and other dimensional portals and paranormal evidence involving Native American stuff, and asking all about that kind of stuff. There really isn't any questions or research in here that involved looking at outer space for flying saucers or spaceships. This is all consciousness, psychic spy research, and similar to what was going on at Stanford with Uri Geller, right? With Hal Puthoff, Andrei Puharich, Jacobo Grinsberg. This is just now scaled up using military officers as security guards as the experimental subjects. This is one of the actual tests that they were doing that he did there. That was them taking pennies and crystals, tuning forks and twine and blocks, and then doing paranormal investigating like you would see on a ghost hunter type show, right? There's not much to do with flying saucers from outer space with all of this. Where do we see the 5 observables of Lou Elizondo coming into play? We really don't. Where does the phased array at Mount Wilson Ranch come into play here?
Area here,
right?
This is.
So let's go back here, and
this square area here, this is the lower meadow.
That's clearly artificial. That looks like a phased array.
Sure does.
Looks like a phased array antenna system built under the ground.
You see where I'm going with this, Eric?
We've heard rumors that certain low frequencies in that range could be used to not only detect UAPs, but possibly even take them down. But I never knew them to bury them. They were always on the surface.
Like a low frequency beam of some
Well,
kind?
just phased array radar. The rumors that is actually radar that brought down the Roswell thing, assuming it was real. You know, I don't have any evidence one way or the other, but my point is that's just another one of the stories we've heard that kind of fits in the why Bigelow would have been interested.
Right.
But if Bigelow would have found that, he would have stayed.
That's what I thought too.
Unless.
But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp, that would be the ultimate technological achievement.
So there they are with Travis Taylor from Skinwalker Ranch talking about DARPA's remote controlling people using frequencies underlying through the earth, almost like the same type of research continuation that we've seen throughout the theme of all the characters that were at Skinwalker Ranch and at Mount Wilson Ranch, who are now supposed to be involved in ufology, all the way up to Lou Elizondo, who always skirts around the idea that he was trained in remote viewing. He doesn't even like to talk about that connection. So what is the underlying revelation that we get from all of this? And because we can't just focus on the weaponization, we can't just say, well, it's all technology, it's all Project Bluebeam, it's all going to be fake. UFOs are all just a government conspiracy of holograms and this reverse phased array radar technology, Tesla tech that's faking it now. And now we see the truth. Well, all of that can be true, but paradoxically, we have to remember the underlying revelations to this as well, which is that the ancient history shows that this goes way deeper into nonlinear time or into the ancient past before the technology was even a factor. And even now in 2022, we have the Nobel Prize in Physics, where these three amazing individuals, they basically had the theory presented and won the Nobel Prize for non-local reality, quantum entanglement and consciousness, meaning that your consciousness and our physical reality isn't actually here. We live in sort of a holographic simulation, which leaves tons and tons of quantum reality, space-time entanglement room for things like UFOs, UAPs, ultra-terrestrials, other dimensional entities, and frequential layers of reality to all be there, for us to have parallel realities and subdimensions and parallel dimensions alongside of us. There's plenty of room for that within the revelations of this. It's just an unfortunate truth that within the realization of the reality that we live in now and the understanding of what this shows us in this matrix of consciousness that we live in, that is connected into ancient pasts, connected to these ancient civilizations and people and what they were naturally drawn to do all the way across Nevada, Arizona, Utah, the ancient pyramid cultures. This is even a stone circle at Skinwalker Ranch. Why we have the Native American evidence and presence, ancient shaman and deities depicted on the petroglyphs that they uncover at Skinwalker Ranch all over the walls here. the Native American skins and the rituals, the stone circles that go on there, the interdimensional portal aspects. It all has to do more with the fundamental reality of and the fundamental reality that we live in human consciousness. It's not so much about flying saucers from outer space, metal craft with aliens inside. Some of that might be a part of it. But what all these scientists were really doing was they were looking at the perceptions of the mind. They were looking at DNA and the human body as a receiving antenna. They were looking at telepathic communication and almost channeling and doing esoteric occult mystery work, almost like science wizards. You know, they were doing like techno shamanism and all of that. But what the truth is underneath this left-handed dark technology going on is this fundamental realization of how reality really works. And this deeper underlying to the revelation goes back to what Andre Puharch says in this video clip here.
You all know about the planetary grid. It's a structure, kind of a geodesic structure of the planet, in which there are certain power centers, and they all form a very elaborate link. You can read about it in the magazine called Pursuit. They've run about 3 stories on it in the last 2 years. Anyway, this planetary grid, if you are on a power center, and there are several hundred of these power centers, you can then use occult influence, which means you use somebody who's a very powerful sender of thoughts and energy, and from that point, you radiate out your thoughts, and influence people without their knowing they're being influenced. So this is the current program of the neo-Nazis to take over the world. And what they do is, if the power center they locate, according to their own grid, is on land, they will try to find exactly where it is, actually go out and do the survey, and then they buy that land, and they put one of their people on there who's a very highly trained psychic. And they're buying up property all over the planet this way, and I knew the guy in England who was in charge of that particular operation. And this is what drove all the scientists nuts in 1976, when the Russians first came on the air with the ELF signals being sent out from Russia. What drove them crazy was, here's a wave that can go through the entire Earth without being attenuated. In other words, it doesn't lose any energy to any surrounding system. And yet when it hits a human head or a body, it does interact and the signal is absorbed. This soliton is picked up. And it's taken 7 years of research, particularly by the Navy, to find out that this hydrogen bond here is sensitive to frequency. And there are certain very critical frequencies, like 7.82 is a good frequency. It actually reinforces the integrity of DNA.
And they make a deal that the Mossad lets me.
So as we look at this and we review that, this idea, this belief system, that there is this Earth matrix grid, that the core of the Earth is actually the core receiver of human consciousness, that our thoughts, our intentions and our motives and integrity, our desires and passions actually flow as this invisible ether into the core of the Earth. And that flowing molten core of the Earth, as this cosmic energy, basically quantum energy, flows out as the fundamental elements of reality that comes up into a ball of the Earth and resonates as our physical reality all the way out to the constellations and the sky above. And that is all an entanglement with our perceptions. And so what they were trying to do was the weaponization of this Earth grid. First of all, we have to acknowledge that all 5 of Lou Elizondo's UAP observables have existed since Nikola Tesla's technology. It is all achievable through this reversed soliton. They can create the holograms. They can project the mind controls directly into the brain. Operation Paperclip created a nuclear and ultra-low ELF frequency race, and the directed energy weapons that came out of that can create UFO holograms and exhibit all 5 of the observables. And I think that Lou Elizondo knows this, and I think all of these scientists knew that. And I think a lot of their research and what they were really doing at Skinwalker Ranch and Mount Wilson Ranch was involved around the race against the Soviet Union and other adversaries around this technology. And alongside of that, they figured out how it can target human DNA and remote control people through mind control systems. But along with that as well, we have to remember that the natural reality of the ELF grid has always been here. The consciousness Earth grid matrix has existed forever. Just because they have weaponized it with technology and they're trying to hijack it for different reasons, or to go defend us against Soviet Union technology, this old woodpecker technology, our reality fundamentally could be made of consciousness if that's real. At least these scientists and ufologists, they believe that that is real. And that's probably why Travis Taylor has written a book about the secret and the manifestation and all of that, the law of attraction. But ancient civilizations for tens of thousands of years have understood naturally this interface between the earth and the stars and human consciousness. And the evidence of that is all over in the ancient pyramid building cultures, the petroglyphs, the pictographs, the hieroglyphs, and even their ritualistic cultures that are all synchronistic through their medicine wheels, the yin and the yang, the rotation of the Big Dipper around the North Star, and the mandalas of ancient India. They all fit, like with the Aztec calendar, this same sort of understanding of how reality works from the core out through human consciousness as being really connected to us. So even though there's this weaponization of the matrix, alongside with that, paradoxically, they would have been able to figure out, alongside with going into the low ELF spectrum of the earth, penetrating through the oceans with radar technology, understanding how all this operated in order to conquer the human mind and consciousness. Inadvertently, the stories of them catching UFOs, discovering underground alien structures or hidden structures, is all within the potential that that could have occurred. This type of technology, these phased arrays and this understanding of the Earth matrix grid system, if this technology really does what I think it can do, then the potential for them to be able to render the oceans and the Earth basically transparent is all there. If they exist, we know that they exist. Our government has this radar technology to be able to expose that they exist. And that goes throughout the whole earth. I believe that this technology is there. And if extraterrestrials or other dimensional higher beings know how reality works better than us, then they also know how this earth grid consciousness system works as well. And then it goes through the human mind and through the nature of reality itself interdimensionally more than it does spaceships from outer space. So when we think about all this, keep all of this in mind, the idea of the ley lines and the vortices, and then we start to understand why the research teams that were looking for UFO crash recovery material have to get funding for weapons development and technology to be developed through the government programs for defense purposes. But really what they're doing at places like this, like at Skinwalker Ranch, is focusing on human consciousness and the technology potentially or allegedly around human consciousness, telepathy, remote viewing, and altered states of consciousness, out-of-body travel, and hijacking human perceptions like MK Ultra type stuff. So all of that is like layers and layers and layers in here that hopefully we can focus on the underlying deeper resonance there, which is that this phenomena has existed since before the technology. The evidence of 10,000-year-old arrowheads and spearheads and ritual sites being on these same ley lines and vortices is all present. and the technology comes after. So for me, instead of getting freaked out by the technology aspects and the weaponization of it, we have to remember and focus on the ancient culture that presupposes and predates all of this, that drew the scientists there to work on the Tesla tech, right? We have to think about the geomancy connections to the earth and stars and who we are and with our DNA, before we get too freaked out by it being MK Ultra, if that makes sense. So this is why I'm drawn to the connection between the ancient past and the ancient petroglyphs, and this modern overlapping realization of non-local reality and non-local consciousness that these amazing scientists have been discovering, how it leaves plenty of room for our own evolution and for the nature of our true reality to have the phenomena be something that's possible. And these scientists, a lot of them are still out there. So Hal Puthoff, who was a part of this whole program, has been to Skinwalker Ranch and there at Stanford Research Institute and all of that. One of his interns was Dr. Jim Segala, and him and I now are colleagues working together on modular systems to be able to detect the phenomena. And we are approaching this as sort of a preventative measure to be able to tell the difference between the technology and the actual intrinsic geological phenomena, with if there is other dimensional beings or communication going on, and what was really happening there. Can we capture it with the gamma radiation or microwave radiation with these sensors using computer devices and stuff like that, software technology? And we've been doing this. We've been going back to places like Mount Wilson Ranch and taking the former security guard there and doing brainwave scans to see if we can collect the data. We're trying to do remote viewing and consciousness exercises where if we can get the same sorts of visual perceptions and things, and we're doing this independent of the government, independent of these secret programs and the weapons technology, trying to go to ancient indigenous locations to do that. And I'm doing that actively right now with Dr. Jim Segala on my team to do that. So again, I just want to remind everybody, where do we see come into play the 5 observables when you look into the actual teams involved who are at the UFO congressional hearings about the UFO recovery programs? It seems like the actual players involved really weren't interested in any of this sort of tic-tac stuff except for the reverse radar systems that we talk about, defending against that. And it so quickly delves into the psychic spy research, doing psychedelics and doing remote viewing and telepathy, that we have to realize that the UFO research has always focused on the hidden frequencies and dimensions of reality more than it has any kind of metallic flying craft. UFO researchers and all of their funding actually went into remote viewing and telepathy at ancient shaman sites. They weren't really looking for UFO crashes. So I am proposing that the 5 observables of Lou Elizondo are basically inadequate and only focus on a very narrow perspective that has to do with that radar technology overlapping. It has to do with having the public believe that the Tic Tacs and the radar technology that Russia, the Soviet Union has, and that we have, and that we've experienced on, that can interface with the brain and even target DNA and be seen and show up on radar, everything that we've been talking about should be part of the consideration. And it actually accounts for all of these observables right up front from Operation Paperclip. So I feel like these don't make any sense. They're inadequate. And the radar technology with the psychic spy programs account for all of that. But if the technology worked, they would have, if there was UFOs and aliens, they would have found them in the 1940s. But how they did it was through either the radar technology that we've been talking about, or they did it through this, through the psychic spy program that we see at Stanford Research Institute, that all of these players were actually involved in along every step of the way. The real players that go all the way to Skinwalker Ranch and beyond. So when we think about ufology and we start looking for bodies, we start looking for crash materials, Roswell, like actual spaceships coming down, and we have people pointing us to look for technology with observables like transmedium and this and that. We have the technology to do that, but my question is why does all of this always revolve around these ancient indigenous sites overlapping? What is it about the geo earth grid and consciousness connection where the remote viewing, the channeling, and that side of it is all at play? So either they believed it and they were using their funding to actually go through that because of their personal beliefs as Scientologists, their involvement with the satanic community, or being Freemasons, members of the Mormon Church or whatever, trying to seek the evidence and the proof to back up their belief systems, formed sort of these government teams revolving around ufology that were going to these esoteric places based on Operation Paperclip. Or the truth is like what we're finding is that reality and consciousness are non-local. If what the Nobel Prize winners are finding is true, then that means that there is plenty of room for the phenomena for UFOs, and the connection is deeper connected within who we are, within our DNA and our perceptions of reality more than we think. And so I just want you to consider all that before we keep looking up at the sky, why they want us to do remote viewing, why CE5 is all involved in consciousness and meditation, and why all of the scientists along the way believed in this sort of esoteric earth grid system and the connection with the mind and human consciousness. The weaponization and overlay of all that is in one basket, and then you have the eternal truth about the nature of reality and who we are as human beings. And that's the part of it that I'm the most fascinated in. So that's my presentation on the UFO ultraspectrum and all of the different aspects of that, and how we need to expand the 5 observables outside of just the technology and into the human consciousness, the telepathic interactions or quantum entanglement features, and how it affects us as human beings. All right. Thank you.